The chain binding Penelope Andrews' ankle to the cold basement wall clanked as she shifted on the dirty mattress. Her once beautiful blue dress now torn and stained with the grime of her week-long captivity. Outside, she could hear the raucous laughter and piano music from the Silver Dollar Saloon, above sounds of merriment that only deepened her despair, as the Wyoming Territory sunset filtered through the tiny basement window. Penelope wiped away a tear, refusing to let Silas Murdock, the owner of the saloon, and the man who'd imprisoned her, see her cry again. She'd arrived in Redemption Creek just 10 days ago, responding to an advertisement for a schoolteacher position, only to discover the position was a trap to lure educated young women to Murdock's establishment for other purposes. When she'd refused his indecent proposal, he'd locked her away, promising she'd come around eventually. The basement door creaked open, sending a shaft of yellow lamplight cascading down the wooden stairs. Penelope tensed, expecting to see Murdock's bulky silhouette, but instead the slight figure of Jenny, one of the saloon girls, appeared with a tray of food. "Miss Andrews," Jenny whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the door above. "I brought you some stew. It's hot tonight." "Thank you, Jenny," Penelope replied, accepting the bowl with trembling hands. Has he said anything more about when he'll let me go?" Jenny's eyes fell. "I'm sorry, miss. Mr. Murdock's got plans for you tomorrow night. Some important men coming through town, he says. He says it's time you started earning your keep." Cold dread washed over Penelope. "No, please, Jenny, you have to help me." "I can't," Jenny said, backing away. "He'd kill me. I'm sorry, truly I am." After Jenny left, Penelope pushed the stew away, her appetite gone. She tugged futilely at the shackle around her ankle, wincing as the iron dug into her already raw skin. The chain was secured to a heavy iron ring bolted into the stone wall, impossible to break without tools. She tried everything, begging, reasoning, even attempting to seduce one of Murdock's men into helping her. Nothing had worked. Tomorrow night, her fate would be sealed unless a miracle happened. Outside, a commotion erupted, raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, then the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Penelope pressed herself against the wall, wondering if death by stray bullet might be preferable to what awaited her. More shouting followed, then heavy footsteps pounding across the floor above. The basement door flew open again, and this time a man she'd never seen before stood silhouetted at the top of the stairs. He was tall and lean, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed Stetson. "Anyone down there?" He called out, his voice low and cautious. "Yes," Penelope cried, finding her voice. "Please help me, I'm chained down here." The man descended the stairs quickly, a lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. As he approached, Penelope could see his face clearly, handsome and weathered, with piercing blue eyes and several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. His duster was covered in trail dust, marking him as someone recently arrived in town. "Good Lord," he breathed, taking in her condition. "What in the hell is going on here?" "My name is Penelope Andrews," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm being held prisoner. Please, can you help me?" The stranger knelt beside her, examining the shackle and chain. "Flynn Callahan," he introduced himself. "And yes, madam, I surely intend to help you." He holstered his gun and set down the lantern. "How long have you been down here?" "A week. The saloon owner, Murdock, he say no more." Flynn reached into his boot and pulled out a slender metal tool. "I know Murdock's reputation. Half the reason I rode into this sorry excuse for a town was on his account." With skillful movements, he worked the lock on her shackle. "I'm a bounty hunter, Miss Andrews. Been tracking Murdock for months. He's wanted in 3 territories for various crimes, but I never imagined I'd find something like this." The lock finally gave with a satisfying click, and the shackle fell away from Penelope's ankle. She rubbed the raw, bruised skin, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Can you walk?" Flynn asked, his voice gentler now. "I think so," Penelope said, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. Flynn caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," he murmured, his strong arms supporting her. "You've been confined too long. Your muscles need time." "What happened upstairs?" she asked. "I heard gunfire." "Murdock and I had a disagreement," Flynn said grimly. "He decided to draw on me. Bad decision on his part. Is he?" He won't be troubling anyone again, but his men scattered and they'll be back with reinforcements soon enough. We need to get you out of here. Without warning, he scooped her into his arms. Penelope was startled by how safe she suddenly felt, a feeling she hadn't experienced since arriving in Wyoming territory. I have a horse waiting out back, Flynn explained as he carried her up the stairs. We'll ride out tonight, get you someplace safe. The saloon was eerily quiet as they emerged from the basement. Tables were overturned and Penelope glimpsed Murdock's body sprawled near the bar. She looked away quickly. The other girls, she asked, left when the shooting started. Some seemed mighty relieved about it too. Outside, the night air felt like heaven against Penelope's skin after the dank basement. Flynn's horse, a magnificent black stallion, waited patiently behind the saloon. Have you ever ridden before, Miss Andrews? Flynn asked as he helped her onto the saddle. Yes, but not for some time, she admitted. Just hold tight then. He swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around for the reins. We'll ride through the night, put some distance between us and this place. As they galloped away from Redemption Creek, Penelope felt both terror and exhilaration. She was free, but she was also completely dependent on this stranger, this dangerous man who killed with such ease, even if his victim had deserved it. Where are we going? She asked, raising her voice over the drumming of hooves. I have a cabin, Flynn replied, his breath warm against her ear. About 20 miles north of here. We'll be safe there while you recover. Then I'll take you wherever you want to go. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, Penelope gradually relaxing against Flynn's solid frame as exhaustion overtook her. The rhythmic movement of the horse and the security of Flynn's arms around her lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. She was startled when Flynn suddenly reined in the horse and dismounted, pulling her down after him. We need to rest the horse, he explained, leading them to a small creek barely visible in the moonlight, and you should drink and stretch your legs. Penelope sank gratefully to the grass beside the creek, scooping the cool water to her lips and splashing some on her face. Flynn knelt beside his horse, murmuring to it softly as it drank. Why are you helping me? Penelope asked suddenly. Beyond just freeing me, I mean. You could have left me in town. Flynn looked up, his expression unreadable in the darkness. I've seen enough suffering in my time to last several lifetimes, Miss Andrews. I wasn't about to leave you there, especially not knowing what kind of retribution Murdock's friends might take. But I have nothing to offer you in return. Not everything in this world is about payment and debt, he said softly. Sometimes people just help each other because it's the right thing to do. Something in his tone made Penelope wonder what experiences had shaped this man, what sorrows or joys had carved the lines around his eyes. What battles had given him the scar she could now see trailing from his temple into his hairline. Tell me about yourself, Flynn said, changing the subject as he sat beside her. What brought a lady like you to a place like Redemption Creek? Penelope sighed. I was a schoolteacher in Philadelphia. After my parents died of influenza last year, there was nothing keeping me there. I saw an advertisement for teachers needed in the Wyoming territory. The salary offered was generous, and I thought it would be an adventure. And instead, you found Murdock, Flynn said grimly. He met me at the stagecoach, claiming to be from the town council. Said he'd take me to my lodgings until the schoolhouse was ready. I was so naive. She shook her head. Once we reached the saloon, I realized something was wrong, but by then it was too late. Flynn's jaw tightened. Murdock's been running that scheme for years. Most of his victims end up working in his establishment or sold to mining camps further west. There were others in the basement before me, Penelope whispered. Jenny told me, girls who resisted too long. What happened to them, she wouldn't say, but her eyes told me enough. Flynn was silent for a long moment. It's over now, he finally said. Murdock's dead and you're free, that's what matters. They rested for another few minutes before continuing their journey. This time, Penelope was more aware of Flynn's proximity as they rode, the strength in his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her back. Despite everything, she felt a flutter of something unfamiliar stirring within her. The cabin appeared just before dawn, a solid structure nestled among pine trees, with a small corral attached. It was more substantial than Penelope had expected, with a stone chimney and actual glass windows. "It's not much," Flynn said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it's sturdy and warm." Inside, the cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area nearby. A bed stood in one corner, covered with thick furs, and a table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Shelves lined with books suggested Flynn Callahan was more than just the hardened bounty hunter he appeared to be. "You read," Penelope said, surprised. Flynn smiled faintly as he lit a lantern. "Does that shock you, that a man who hunts killers might also enjoy Shakespeare?" "A little," she admitted, "but pleasantly so." "Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing to the bed. "I need to tend to my horse, then I'll fix us something to eat." When Flynn returned, Penelope had washed her face and hands in the basin she'd found and was examining his book collection. He watched her for a moment from the doorway, struck by how different she looked now, still dirty and disheveled, but with a natural grace that her captivity hadn't destroyed. "You have Emerson," she noted, holding up a volume. "He was my father's favorite." "Your father had good taste," Flynn replied, moving to the fireplace to stoke the embers back to life. "Are you hungry?" "Starving," she admitted. Flynn prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack trail food, but to Penelope it tasted better than any fine Philadelphia restaurant fare. As they ate, she noticed Flynn watching her carefully. "What is it?" she asked. "I'm trying to figure out what to do with you," he said honestly. "The nearest proper town is Cheyenne, 3 days' ride from here. I could take you there, help you find passage back east." Penelope set down her fork. "Is that what you think I want, to go back east, isn't it? After what you've been through, I'd imagine you've had your fill of the frontier." She looked around the cabin, considering. "I came west for a reason, Mr. Callahan. I wanted a fresh start, a new life. I still do, even if my introduction to the territory was less than ideal." Flynn studied her with newfound respect. "You're a brave woman, Miss Andrews." "Please call me Penelope. After what we've been through, formality seems unnecessary." "Penelope," he repeated, the name sounding almost like a caress in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Flynn." As night fell, the practicalities of their situation became apparent. There was only one bed. "I'll sleep by the fire," Flynn said immediately, gathering some blankets. "You don't have to," Penelope began. "Yes, I do," he interrupted firmly. "You've been through enough. The bed's yours for as long as we're here." Penelope didn't argue further. Despite her newfound trust in Flynn, she was relieved by his respectful distance. As she settled into the surprisingly comfortable bed, she watched him arranging his makeshift bedroll on the floor. "Flynn," she said softly. He looked up. "Yes, thank you, not just for rescuing me, but for everything." He nodded once, his expression gentle. "Sleep well, Penelope, you're safe now." For the first time in over a week, Penelope believed it. She closed her eyes and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the cabin windows and the smell of coffee. Penelope opened her eyes to find Flynn already up and moving about, preparing breakfast. "There's water heating for washing," he said when he noticed she was awake. "And I found some clothes that might fit you. They belong to a friend who stayed here occasionally." Penelope detected a note of something in his voice when he mentioned this friend, but she didn't pry. After he stepped outside to give her privacy, she gratefully washed and changed into the simple calico dress he'd provided. It was a bit large but clean and whole, a vast improvement over her tattered blue dress. When Flynn returned, he stopped short at the sight of her. "You look better," he said, the understatement making her smile. "Amazing what soap and clean clothes can do," she replied. "Thank you for these." They shared a breakfast of flapjacks and coffee, and Penelope felt her strength returning with each bite. In the daylight, she could see Flynn more clearly, the fine lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled, the streak of gray at his temples that belied his otherwise youthful appearance. "How long have you been a bounty hunter?" she asked. Flynn considered before answering. 7 years. Before that, I was a Texas Ranger." "What made you change?" "The Rangers have rules, boundaries. Sometimes justice needs to reach beyond those limits." His expression darkened. "My wife and son were killed by raiders who crossed into Mexico after. The Rangers wouldn't pursue them." Penelope's heart ached for him. "So you did." I did. Took me 2 years, but I found every last one. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held a pain that time hadn't diminished. Afterward, I couldn't go back to wearing the badge, but I found I had a talent for tracking men others couldn't find. Men like Murdock. Flynn nodded. Men who think they're above the law, men who hurt others and believe they'll never pay for it. And you make them pay. When I can. He rose, collecting their plates. The law doesn't always reach where it's needed most in these territories. Sometimes people need someone who operates in the spaces between. They spent the day resting, with Flynn checking periodically for any sign they'd been followed. Penelope found herself watching him, the economical way he moved, the gentleness with which he treated his horse, the quiet competence in everything he did. By evening, she felt almost like herself again, sitting in a chair by the fire with one of Flynn's books while he cleaned his guns at the table. The domesticity of the scene struck her as oddly comforting. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Now that Murdock is dealt with," Flynn looked up from his work. "There's always another bounty, always another man who needs finding. It sounds lonely. It can be," he admitted. "But I've grown accustomed to my own company. Don't you ever want more? A home, a family?" Flynn's hands stilled. "I had those things once. Losing them taught me not to reach for them again. So you punish yourself by living alone forever." The words came out more sharply than Penelope intended. Flynn's eyes met hers, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "It's not punishment, it's protection." "For whom? Yourself or the people you might care about? Both." He resumed his work, his movements more deliberate now. "This life I lead is dangerous, Penelope. I've made enemies, getting close to people. It puts them at risk." "So does being alive," she countered. "My parents never left Philadelphia, never did anything risky. They still died. Safety is an illusion." Flynn didn't respond, but she could see her words had struck home. They passed the rest of the evening in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The next morning, Flynn announced he needed to hunt. "Our supplies are running low," he explained. "I won't go far, but I'll be gone most of the day." Penelope nodded. "I'll be fine. Is there anything I can do while you're gone? Rest, read, whatever you like." He hesitated at the door. "There's a revolver in the drawer by the bed. Do you know how to use one?" "My father taught me," she said, surprising him. "He believed women should be able to protect themselves." "Your father was a wise man." Flynn nodded approvingly. "I'll be back before dark." Alone in the cabin, Penelope explored more thoroughly. She found a trunk containing women's clothes, presumably belonging to the same friend who'd owned the dress she wore. The clothes were simple but well made, and she selected a few items that fit her better than the first dress. In another drawer, she discovered a small portrait, a painting of a pretty woman with dark hair and a solemn-faced little boy who had Flynn's eyes. His family, she realized. The family he'd lost. She carefully replaced the portrait, feeling like an intruder in his grief. By mid-afternoon, Penelope had washed her original blue dress, hanging it to dry by the fire, and was preparing vegetables she'd found in Flynn's small garden when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, not just Flynn's stallion. Her heart racing, she ran to the window. 3 riders were approaching the cabin, rough-looking men with guns visible at their hips. Penelope recognized one of them as one of Murdock's men from the saloon. Moving quickly, she retrieved the revolver from the drawer, checking that it was loaded. Then she positioned herself behind the door, listening as the men dismounted outside. "This has got to be the place," one voice said. "Tracks lead right here." "Callahan's gonna pay for what he did to Murdock," another growled. "And if that schoolteacher's with him, well, we'll have some fun before we kill her too." Penelope's blood ran cold. She gripped the revolver tighter, trying to remember everything her father had taught her about shooting. She had 6 bullets and 3 targets, not impossible odds, but she'd need to be precise. The door burst open, the first man striding in confidently. Come out, wherever you." Penelope fired, the bullet catching him in the shoulder. He howled in pain, stumbling backward into his companions. Taking advantage of their confusion, she fired again, hitting another man in the leg. "She's armed," one shouted as they scrambled for cover. Penelope ducked behind the table as they returned fire, bullets splintering the wood around her. She fired twice more, keeping them at bay, but knew she was trapped and outnumbered. A window shattered as one of the men tried to flank her. Penelope swung around, firing her fifth bullet, hearing a satisfying grunt of pain. But now she had only one shot left and at least two men still functioning. "You're dead, bitch," one of them shouted. "Nobody does that to my friends." Penelope steadied her breathing, knowing she needed to make her last shot count. As a shadow fell across the doorway, she prepared to fire. The crack of a rifle shot came from outside, followed immediately by another. A man screamed, then silence fell. "Penelope," Flynn's voice called. "Are you all right?" "I'm here," she called back, her voice shaking. "I'm unharmed." Flynn appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, his expression a mixture of fury and concern. Behind him, she could see two bodies on the ground outside. The third man lay wounded inside the cabin. Flynn crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms without a word. Penelope clung to him, suddenly overcome by delayed shock and fear. "I heard the shots from the ridge," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "I've never ridden so fast in my life." "They were Murdock's men," she said against his chest. "They tracked us here." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "I should never have left you alone. You couldn't have known." She pulled back slightly to look at him. "Besides, I managed." His eyes took in the bodies, the bullet holes in the walls, and finally the revolver still clutched in her hand. A smile of grudging admiration crossed his face. "So you did. Your father taught you well." A groan from the wounded man inside reminded them they weren't alone. Flynn's expression hardened as he turned to the man. "Please," the man whimpered, "don't kill me. I was just following orders." "Whose orders?" Flynn demanded, keeping one arm protectively around Penelope. "Murdock's dead." "His brother," the man gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Garrett Murdock. He runs things in Cheyenne. When he heard what you did to Silas, he put a bounty on your head and the woman's." Flynn and Penelope exchanged glances. "This complicated matters significantly. How much?" Flynn asked. 500 for you, 3 for her." The man's eyes darted between them. "There'll be others coming. Garrett won't stop until you're both dead." Flynn considered this information, his expression grim. "Looks like our troubles aren't over," he said to Penelope. "What do we do now?" she asked. "First, we deal with him." Flynn nodded toward the wounded man. "Then we need to move. This location is compromised." He bound the man's wound roughly, then tied him to a chair. "We'll leave you for the sheriff," Flynn told him. "He should be through here in a few days. If you're lucky, you won't bleed out or get eaten by wolves before then." The man paled but said nothing more as Flynn gathered essential supplies. "Pack only what you need," he instructed Penelope. "We travel light from here on out." Within an hour, they had loaded Flynn's horse and a second mount he'd captured from their attackers. As they prepared to leave, Penelope looked back at the cabin with regret. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're losing your home because of me." Flynn followed her gaze. "It's just a place," he said softly, "and it hasn't felt like home in a very long time." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that their fates were now inextricably linked. "Where will we go?" Penelope asked as they mounted their horses. Flynn looked westward toward the mountains. "I know a place. It's remote, difficult to find unless you know what you're looking for. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move." As they rode away from the cabin, Penelope realized that despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of their future, she felt more alive than she had in years. And riding beside Flynn Callahan, she felt something else too, something she wasn't quite ready to name, but that warmed her from within like a small, persistent flame. They rode hard for 2 days, following game trails and waterways to mask their tracks. Flynn was a master at wilderness travel, teaching Penelope little tricks to move without leaving obvious signs of their passage. They spoke little during the journey, saving their energy for the difficult terrain. By the evening of the second day, they had climbed high into the foothills of the mountains. The air was cooler here, fragrant with pine and sage. Flynn finally reined in his horse at the edge of a small, hidden valley. "There," he said, pointing to a structure nearly invisible among the trees. "That's where we're heading." As they drew closer, Penelope could make out a small, sturdy cabin built into the side of a cliff, its weathered logs almost the same color as the surrounding rock. A stream ran nearby, and a small meadow provided grazing for their horses. "It's beautiful," Penelope breathed. "How did you find this place?" "I didn't," Flynn admitted as they dismounted. "It belonged to a trapper named Mackenzie. Saved my life once when I was tracking a fugitive in these mountains during a blizzard. Before he died, he told me I could use it if I ever needed to disappear." Inside, the cabin was dusty but sound. It was smaller than Flynn's other cabin, with just one room containing a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserved food and supplies. "Old Mackenzie believed in being prepared," Flynn explained as he lit a lantern. "Said you never knew when you might be snowed in for months." While Flynn tended to the horses, Penelope swept the cabin and arranged their supplies. By the time he returned, she had a fire going and water heating for coffee. "You've made it homey already," Flynn observed, looking around with appreciation. "It doesn't take much," Penelope replied, brushing dust from her hands. "Just a fire and some care." They shared a simple meal of jerky and beans, sitting close by the fire as night fell outside. The temperature dropped rapidly with the sun, and Penelope found herself moving closer to Flynn for warmth. "What happens now?" she asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind throughout their journey. "How long will we need to hide?" Flynn sighed, adding another log to the fire. "Garrett Murdock is a powerful man in Cheyenne, more powerful than his brother was in Redemption Creek. He has connections with the railroad companies, politicians, even some territorial judges. So the law won't help us. Not likely. Not unless we can find proof of his illegal activities, something concrete enough to outweigh his influence." Penelope considered this. "What about the other girls at the saloon? Jenny and the others. They could testify about what Silas did. If we could find them, maybe, but they scattered after the shooting and they'd be terrified of crossing Garrett." Flynn ran a hand through his hair. "Besides, we'd have to get to them before Garrett's men do." "So we're trapped," Penelope said, a note of despair creeping into her voice. "Hiding in the mountains forever." Flynn turned to her, taking her hands in his. "No, not forever. I promise you that, Penelope. I'll find a way to end this threat, to give you back your freedom." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Our freedom," she corrected softly. "We're in this together now." His thumbs traced circles on her palms, sending unexpected shivers up her arms. "Yes," he agreed, "together." For a long moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then Flynn gently released her hands and stood. "It's late," he said, his voice gruffer than before. "We should get some rest." Again, there was only one bed. Flynn began arranging blankets on the floor, but Penelope stopped him. "This cabin is half the size of the other one, and twice as cold," she said practically. "The floor will be freezing. We're both adults. We can share the bed." Flynn looked uncertain. "Penelope, I don't want you to feel I feel safe with you," she interrupted. "Safer than I've felt with anyone in a very long time. Please don't be chivalrous to the point of catching pneumonia." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "When you put it that way." They settled into the bed with careful distance between them, both lying stiffly on their backs. Despite her practical suggestion, Penelope found her heart racing at Flynn's proximity. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the clean scent of his skin beneath the wood smoke clinging to his clothes. "Flynn," she whispered after several minutes of charged silence. "Yes." His voice sounded strained. "Tell me something about your wife, if you don't mind." He was quiet so long that Penelope thought he might have fallen asleep or was choosing not to answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low in the darkness. "Her name was Catherine. She was the daughter of a neighboring rancher in Texas. We grew up together, always knew we'd marry someday. She was fearless, rode as well as any man, could shoot the eye out of a jackrabbit at 50 paces. He paused, and Penelope heard the smile in his voice at the memory. "But she was gentle too, had a way with injured animals, with children. Our son, James, he was just like her." "How old was he?" Penelope asked softly. 5, just starting to ride his own pony," Flynn's voice caught. "They died while I was away on ranger business. Comanche raid on our ranch. By the time I got home," Penelope reached across the space between them, finding his hand in the darkness. "I'm so sorry." Flynn's fingers curled around hers. "It was 13 years ago. Some days the pain is duller. Some days it's like it happened yesterday. And that's why you became a bounty hunter, to find the men responsible." Yes, and after that, I just kept going. It gave me purpose when I had none. Penelope squeezed his hand. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking, he replied. Most people avoid the subject, as if not speaking of them will make me forget. They should be remembered, Penelope said simply. Flynn's thumb stroked the back of her hand, and she felt him relax beside her. They fell asleep that way, hands joined in the darkness, a small but significant bridge across the space between them. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Penelope woke to find herself alone in the bed, but the cabin was warm from a freshly built fire. Outside, she could hear Flynn chopping wood. She dressed quickly in one of the outfits she'd taken from Flynn's cabin's sturdy pants, a flannel shirt, and a woolen vest. Practical clothes for mountain living, even if they weren't exactly what a Philadelphia schoolteacher would normally wear. When she stepped outside, she paused to watch Flynn. He'd stripped to his undershirt despite the cool air, and his muscles flexed powerfully with each swing of the axe. Sweat glistened on his forearms despite the chill, and his face was set in concentration. He looked up, catching her watching him. Instead of embarrassment, Penelope felt a flush of something else entirely as their eyes met. "Good morning," she called, attempting normalcy. "Is there coffee?" "On the stove," he replied, setting down the axe and wiping his brow. "I thought I'd let you sleep. You needed the rest." "I feel much better today," she said truthfully. "Strong enough to be useful. What needs doing?" Flynn looked pleased at her offer. "We should stock up on food. The supplies here are old, and we don't know how long we'll need to stay. I saw a deer sign down by the stream, and there should be trout too." "I can fish," Penelope volunteered. "My father took me often when I was young." They spent the day working side by side, Flynn hunting while Penelope fished, then both of them preserving their catch. By evening, they had smoked venison hanging in the cabin's small smokehouse and a string of trout ready for their dinner. As they worked, they talked more freely than before. Penelope told Flynn about her life in Philadelphia, her dreams of adventure that had brought her west. Flynn shared stories from his ranger days, the friendships he'd formed, the wild beauty of the Texas frontier. They carefully avoided discussion of Garrett Murdock and the danger hanging over them, tacitly agreeing to enjoy this peaceful interlude while it lasted. That night, they sat outside the cabin watching the stars emerge, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill. The Milky Way spread across the sky in a brilliant band, more stars than Penelope had ever seen in her life. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "In Philadelphia, the city lights dim the stars. I never knew there were so many." "One of the compensations of wilderness living," Flynn agreed. "Nature puts on quite a show when there's no one around to compete with her." Penelope glanced at him, his profile strong in the starlight. "Have you ever thought of going back? To civilization, I mean," Flynn considered the question. "Sometimes. Usually in the dead of winter when I'm snowed in somewhere, or when I'm injured with no doctor for 100 miles. He smiled faintly. "But then spring comes, or I heal, and I remember why I choose this life." "Freedom," Penelope murmured. "Yes, and solitude. Or at least that used to be the appeal." His eyes found hers. "Recently, I've been reconsidering the merits of solitude." The look in his eyes made Penelope's heart skip. Before she could respond, a wolf howled in the distance, breaking the moment. "We should go in," Flynn said, rising and offering his hand. "Gets cold quickly up here once the sun's gone." Inside, the cabin was warm from the banked fire. As they prepared for bed, the easy companionship of the day gave way to a new awareness. The bed that had seemed a practical solution the night before now felt fraught with meaning. They lay side by side again, but this time the distance between them seemed both vast and insignificant. Penelope was acutely conscious of Flynn's breathing, of the way the mattress dipped slightly toward his greater weight. "Flynn," she said softly. If we weren't here because we had to be, if we were here by choice, what would you want?" The question hung in the air between them, its meaning clear. Flynn rolled onto his side to face her, though in the darkness she could barely make out his features. "Penelope," he said, her name almost a caress on his lips. "What I want hasn't mattered for a very long time. It matters to me." His hand found her face in the darkness, fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "What I want," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, is something I haven't allowed myself to even consider since Catherine died. Something I convinced myself I didn't deserve, couldn't have. And now, Penelope whispered, now you're here and everything I thought I knew about my life is shifting. His thumb brushed her lower lip. But you've been through a terrible ordeal. You're dependent on me for safety. I won't take advantage of that. Penelope caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. I'm not offering out of gratitude or dependence, Flynn. I'm offering because in the midst of all this danger and uncertainty, one thing has become very clear to me. What's that? He asked, his voice barely audible, that I'm falling in love with you. The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air between them. For a heartbeat, Flynn was perfectly still. Then, with a sound somewhere between a groan and a sigh, he closed the distance between them. His lips found hers in the darkness, tentative at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. Penelope wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer, her body arching toward his with an instinctive need that surprised her. Flynn's kiss was both gentle and demanding, restrained power in every touch. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I never expected this, Flynn murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Never thought I'd feel this way again. Are you sorry? Penelope asked, suddenly uncertain. No, he said firmly, pressing another kiss to her lips. No, I'm not sorry. I'm terrified, but not sorry. Terrified of what? Of how much I already care for you, of how much I stand to lose. His arms tightened around her. I couldn't survive losing someone I love again, Penelope. You won't lose me, she promised, knowing even as she said it that it wasn't a promise she could guarantee. Not with Garrett Murdock's men hunting them. As if reading her thoughts, Flynn said, we need to end this. Find a way to neutralize Murdock so we can have a real chance. How? I've been thinking about it. If we could get evidence of his illegal activities, proof that would stand up in court, we might be able to bring him down legally. Penelope considered this. The girls from the saloon might have information, but as you said, they're scattered and afraid. There's someone else who might help us, Flynn said slowly. A former colleague of mine, a U.S. Marshal named Dawson. Last I heard, he was stationed in Cheyenne. If anyone would stand against Murdock regardless of his influence, it would be Dawson. Can we trust him? With our lives, Flynn said without hesitation. The question is how to contact him without exposing ourselves. They discussed possibilities until late into the night, eventually falling asleep in each other's arms, plans half-formed but hope rekindled. The following days established a pattern. They worked together during daylight hours hunting, fishing, gathering wild berries and herbs, and making the cabin more comfortable. In the evenings, they planned and strategized ways to contact Marshal Dawson and gather evidence against Garrett Murdock. And at night, they explored their growing feelings for each other. Flynn was always gentle, always respectful of boundaries, but Penelope could feel his passion held carefully in check. For her part, she discovered desires she'd never acknowledged before, a hunger for his touch that both thrilled and frightened her. A week after arriving at the mountain cabin, Flynn announced he needed to scout the nearest town. We need information, he explained. News about Murdock, about what happened in Redemption Creek, and we need to get a message to Dawson somehow. I'm coming with you, Penelope said immediately. Flynn shook his head. It's too dangerous. If Murdock's men are watching the towns, I'll be in more danger alone here, she argued. What if they track us while you're gone? Besides, 2 pairs of eyes and ears will gather information faster than one. Flynn clearly wanted to object further, but he recognized the logic of her argument. We'll need to disguise you, he conceded. Your description has likely been circulated. The next morning, they prepared carefully. Penelope bound her chest flatly and dressed in men's clothing, pants, shirt, vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. She tucked her hair up under the hat and smudged dirt on her face to disguise her features. Flynn nodded approvingly as he handed her a revolver. You'll pass for a young man at a distance. Keep your head down and let me do the talking. What about you? Won't you be recognized? I'm counting on my reputation, Flynn explained as he checked his weapons. Most men are too afraid to challenge me directly, even with a bounty on my head. But stay close, just in case. They rode out as dawn broke, heading down the mountain toward a small settlement called Pine Creek. According to Flynn, it was little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of cabins, but it was connected enough to the outside world to have news and a postal service. Pine Creek appeared in the valley below them around midday, a dusty collection of buildings that looked barely substantial enough to deserve a name on a map. They approached cautiously, Flynn constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of danger. "Remember," he murmured as they rode into town, "you're my nephew Thomas helping me on a hunting expedition. Speak as little as possible." Penelope nodded, keeping her head down as instructed. Her heart pounded as they dismounted in front of the trading post, acutely aware of the few people on the street watching them with the curious eyes of those who rarely saw newcomers. Inside the trading post, a grizzled old man looked up from his newspaper. "Help you folks." "Just passing through," Flynn said casually. "Need supplies and information." The shopkeeper squinted at him. "You look familiar, mister." "Get that a lot," Flynn replied, selecting items from the shelves. "What's the news from the bigger settlements? Been in the mountains for weeks." The old man seemed to accept this explanation. "Well, there's plenty happening in Cheyenne, railroad bringing in more folks every day. Oh, and there was some excitement in Redemption Creek shootout at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Owner killed, I heard." "That's so?" Flynn asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Anyone catch who did it?" Story as it was some bounty hunter. "Callahan, I think the name was." The shopkeeper glanced at Flynn more carefully. "Big reward out for him now, him and some schoolteacher woman he supposedly kidnapped." Kidnapped. Penelope couldn't stop herself from exclaiming, then immediately regretted breaking her silence when the shopkeeper's gaze swung to her. "That's what they're saying," the man continued, still studying her. "Though some folks whisper it was more a rescue than a kidnapping. Seems Murdock had unsavory business practices." Flynn placed more items on the counter. "Sounds like trouble best avoided. Any law in these parts these days. U.S. Marshal comes through occasionally. Dawson's his name. Good man from what I hear. Doesn't take bribes, which makes him unusual." The shopkeeper began tallying their purchases. "Anything else you need?" "Actually," Flynn said, lowering his voice, "I've got a letter needs delivering to Marshal Dawson personally, next time he's through." "Private matter. Would you hold it for him?" The shopkeeper hesitated. "I might." "For a consideration." Flynn placed extra coins on the counter. "That enough consideration?" "Reckon it is," the man agreed, pocketing the money. "Leave your letter. I'll see he gets it." While Flynn wrote a carefully worded message to Dawson, Penelope wandered the store, keeping her face averted from the shopkeeper. When a bell jangled announcing new customers, she instinctively moved deeper into the shadows of the back shelves. 3 men entered, trailed dusty and armed. Something about their manner set Penelope's nerves on edge. They moved with a predatory awareness, scanning the shop until their eyes locked on Flynn at the counter. Well, the tallest of the men drawled. "If it isn't Flynn Callahan himself, saved us the trouble of hunting you down." Flynn's hand moved to his gun but froze when all 3 men drew their weapons. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I don't believe I've had the pleasure." "Garrett Murdock sends his regards," the tall man said, "and an invitation to join him in Cheyenne. He's real eager to discuss what happened to his brother." "I'm afraid I'm otherwise engaged," Flynn replied, his eyes flicking briefly to where Penelope stood hidden. The man laughed unpleasantly. "Wasn't actually an invitation you can refuse. Now, where's the woman? Murdock wants her too." "Don't know what you're talking about," Flynn said. "I travel alone." The man gestured to his companions. "Search the place. She's got to be nearby." As the men spread out, Flynn made his move. In one fluid motion, he drew his gun and upended the heavy counter, creating a barricade between himself and the gunmen. Shots rang out, splintering wood and shattering merchandise. "Run, Thomas," Flynn shouted to Penelope. "Get to the horses." Penelope didn't hesitate. She darted for the back door as more shots were fired behind her. Outside, she sprinted for their horses, untying them quickly. Flynn's training over the past week had prepared her for this. They'd discussed and practiced emergency escapes repeatedly. More gunfire erupted from the trading post. Penelope mounted her horse, keeping Flynn's stallion ready beside her. She drew her revolver, prepared to provide covering fire when Flynn emerged. A moment later, he burst through the back door, running in a zigzag pattern as bullets kicked up dust around him. Penelope fired toward the door, forcing the pursuers to duck back inside. Flynn vaulted onto his horse with the grace of long practice. "Ride," he commanded, and they spurred their horses down the main street, more shots following them. They rode hard for several miles before Flynn signaled for them to veer off the trail into a dense stand of trees. Only when they were deep within the forest did they slow to a walk, listening carefully for sounds of pursuit. "Are you hurt?" Flynn asked urgently, scanning Penelope for injuries. "No," she assured him. "What about you?" "Grazed my arm, nothing serious," he grimaced, examining a bloody tear in his sleeve. "They were waiting for us, must have had men watching all the nearby settlements." "Did you get the letter to the shopkeeper?" Flynn nodded, just before they came in. Whether he'll actually give it to Dawson is another question, especially after that display. They made their way back to the cabin by a circuitous route, taking precautions to ensure they weren't followed. By the time they arrived, dusk had fallen, and both were exhausted. Inside, Penelope insisted on treating Flynn's wound a shallow graze that nonetheless needed cleaning. As she worked, Flynn watched her face, his expression troubled. "We can't stay here much longer," he said. "If they found us in Pine Creek, they'll keep searching. These mountains are remote but not impenetrable." "Where can we go?" Penelope asked, finishing the bandage. "Is there anywhere safe?" Flynn was silent for a long moment. "There's one possibility," he finally said. "It's risky, but it might be our best chance." "What is it?" "We go to Cheyenne," he said. Voluntarily, Penelope stared at him. "To Murdock, that's suicide." "Not to Murdock," Flynn clarified. "To Marshal Dawson. If we can reach him directly, tell him what happened, show him your shackle marks as evidence of Silas Murdock's crimes. He might be able to protect us while he investigates Garrett. But Cheyenne is Garrett's territory. He practically owns the town from what you've said. Which is why he won't expect us to go there." Flynn took her hands in his. "Penelope, we can't keep running forever. Sooner or later they'll find us. Our only hope is to fight back legally with the law on our side. And if Dawson can't or won't help us, then we'll be no worse off than we are now," Flynn said grimly. "At least we'll have tried." Penelope considered the plan. It was desperate, certainly, but there was a certain logic to it. "When would we go?" 2 days from now. We'll approach at night, find Dawson before anyone knows we're in town." Flynn squeezed her hands. "I won't force this, Penelope. If you'd rather keep running, we will." Penelope looked into his eyes, seeing both determination and fear, not for himself, she realized, but for her. In that moment, she knew with certainty that she loved this man, this protector who had become so much more to her. "We'll go to Cheyenne," she decided. "Together." Flynn's relief was palpable. He pulled her close, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. "I promise I'll keep you safe." "I know you will," she murmured against his chest, "and I'll do the same for you." That night, their lovemaking held a new intensity, a desperation born of the knowledge that their future was uncertain, that these moments together might be fleeting. Flynn's touch was reverent, as though memorizing every curve and texture of her body. Penelope responded with equal passion, giving herself completely to the man who had come to mean everything to her. Afterward, lying in his arms, Penelope whispered, "If we survive this, when we survive this, what happens then?" Flynn's hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What would you want to happen?" "I'd want to be with you," she said simply, "wherever that might be. Even if it meant a life on the move, a bounty hunter's woman doesn't have an easy time of it." Penelope propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Who says you have to remain a bounty hunter? Maybe there are other paths for both of us." Flynn's eyebrows rose. "Such as?" "I still want to teach," Penelope said, warming to the idea. "There are dozens of settlements that need schoolteachers. And many of them need law enforcement to a sheriff, perhaps." "Sheriff Callahan," Flynn tested the words, a smile playing at his lips, "has a certain ring to it." "It does," Penelope agreed. "A fresh start for both of us, somewhere Murdock's influence doesn't reach, California." Flynn suggested, "Or perhaps Oregon. I've heard the Willamette Valley is beautiful." The fact that he was seriously considering it made Penelope's heart soar. "Anywhere," she said, "as long as we're together." Flynn pulled her down for a kiss. "Let's survive Cheyenne first," he murmured against her lips. "Then we'll plan our future." They spent the next day preparing meticulously. Flynn cleaned and checked his weapons, while Penelope altered clothing to better fit her for traveling. They packed only essentials, knowing speed would be crucial. The plan was straightforward. Ride for Cheyenne, approach the town after dark, locate the marshal's office or home, and present their case to Dawson. If all went well, they would be under official protection while Dawson investigated their claims against both Murdock brothers. If things went badly, neither wanted to dwell on those possibilities. On their final night in the cabin, they sat before the fire, oddly peaceful despite the dangers that lay ahead. Flynn had brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, and they shared it as the flames danced before them. "Tell me about your dreams," Flynn said suddenly. "Before all this happened, what did Penelope Andrews want from life?" Penelope smiled, warmed by both the whiskey and his interest. "I wanted adventure, ironically enough. Philadelphia seemed so, confined, all those rules about proper behavior, proper marriage, proper everything." She took another sip from her cup. "I wanted to see the world beyond brick buildings and cobblestone streets, to make a difference in children's lives by teaching them not just facts and figures, but how to think for themselves. And now, has this adventure changed those dreams?" "It's clarified them," Penelope said thoughtfully. "I still want those things, but I understand better now what really matters: connection, purpose, love." She looked at him directly. "You've shown me that the grandest adventure isn't in places or experiences, but in opening your heart to another person." Flynn's eyes softened. "You've taught me something too, you know, that the past doesn't have to define the future. That it's possible to find love twice in one lifetime, against all odds." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the firelight. "I want you to have this," he said, extending his hand. In his palm lay a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "It was Catherine's," Flynn explained, his voice husky with emotion. "I've carried it all these years, unable to part with it but unwilling to leave it behind." Penelope's eyes widened. "Flynn, I couldn't possibly please," he interrupted. "She would have wanted this. Would have wanted me to find happiness again." He took Penelope's hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises, not yet, not with so much uncertainty ahead, but I want you to have this as a token of what you mean to me and of what I hope we might have together. After." Tears blurred Penelope's vision as Flynn slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her. "I'll treasure it," she whispered, "and return it safely if things don't go as we hope." "They will," Flynn said with more confidence than he likely felt. "They must." They left before dawn the next morning, taking a final look at the cabin that had been their sanctuary. The journey to Cheyenne would take most of the day, even riding hard. As they rode, Penelope found herself memorizing every detail of the landscape, the way the rising sun painted the mountains gold, the scent of pine and sage in the crisp morning air, the sound of their horses' hooves on the rocky trail. If these were to be her final hours of freedom, she wanted to remember them fully. Flynn rode slightly ahead, vigilant for any sign of danger. Occasionally, he would turn to check on her, his eyes softening briefly before returning to their watchful scan of their surroundings. By late afternoon, they had descended from the mountains into the rolling plains that surrounded Cheyenne. They stopped in a sheltered gully to rest the horses and plan their final approach. "The marshal's office is on Front Street," Flynn explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "His lodgings are behind it. He lives alone, so we should be able to approach without alerting others." "What if he's not there?" Penelope asked. "What if he's out of town? Then we'll find a safe place to wait," Flynn replied. "But he's usually in Cheyenne this time of month, handling court cases." As dusk fell, they continued their journey, staying away from the main roads and approaching Cheyenne from the north. The town's lights appeared in the distance, far more substantial than Redemption Creek, with brick buildings 2 and 3 stories tall lining the main streets. "Remember," Flynn said as they left their horses concealed in a stand of trees at the town's edge, "stay close to me. If anything goes wrong, run for the horses and ride for the mountains. Don't wait for me." "I'm not leaving without you," Penelope said firmly. Flynn looked as though he wanted to argue, but instead he merely pressed a quick kiss to her lips. "Let's go then, together." They moved through the darkened outskirts of town, avoiding the few people still abroad at this hour. Penelope wore men's clothing again, her hair tucked under a hat, but they kept to the shadows nonetheless. Front Street was quieter than the Saloon district a few blocks away. The marshal's office was dark, but a light burned in the small house behind it. "That's promising," Flynn murmured as they crouched behind a water trough. "Wait here while I check for guards." Before Penelope could object, he had slipped away, moving with the silent efficiency that made him such an effective hunter of men. She waited, her heart pounding, every sound magnified by her tension: a distant piano from the Saloon district, the rustle of a cat in a nearby alley, the soft footsteps of a passerby on the boardwalk. Flynn returned moments later. "No guards that I can see. Dawson appears to be alone. Now's our chance." They crossed the street quickly, keeping low, and approached the back door of the small house. Flynn knocked softly, his hand on his gun. The door opened, a crack, lamplight spilling out. "Who's there?" a gruff voice demanded. "Marshal Dawson," Flynn said quietly. "It's Flynn Callahan. I need your help." There was a pause, then the door opened wider, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron gray hair and a weathered face. He took in Flynn, then Penelope beside him, his eyes narrowing. "You've got a hell of a nerve showing up here, Callahan," he said, but he stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Both of you, quickly now." Once the door was closed, Dawson turned to face them, his expression stern but not hostile. "Half the guns in the territory are looking for you too. Garrett Murdock's offering enough money to tempt even honest men." "That's why we're here," Flynn said. "Murdock's vendetta is based on lies. I need you to hear the truth." Dawson studied them both carefully. "The truth, eh? Like how you killed Silas Murdock and kidnapped this young woman." His gaze shifted to Penelope. "You'd be Miss Andrews, I presume." "I am," Penelope confirmed. "And I wasn't kidnapped. Mr. Callahan saved my life." "Better sit down then," Dawson said, gesturing to a small table. "This sounds like a story worth hearing." Over the next hour, they told him everything: Penelope's captivity, Flynn's arrival at the saloon, the shootout, their flight to the cabin, and the subsequent attack by Murdock's men. Penelope showed him the healing marks on her ankle from the shackle, and Flynn detailed what he knew of the Murdock brothers' illegal activities. Dawson listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer as the tale unfolded. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I've suspected the Murdocks of various crimes for years," he finally said. "Extortion, trafficking, murder, but they're careful and they have powerful friends. Evidence disappears, witnesses recant or vanish, judges suddenly rule in their favor." He shook his head. "I've never been able to build a case that would stick." "Then you can't help us," Penelope said, her heart sinking. "I didn't say that," Dawson corrected. "I said I haven't been able to build a case before. But with you two as witnesses, and if we can find some of the other girls from the saloon to corroborate your story, we might have a chance." Hope flickered to life in Penelope's chest. "You believe us then?" "I do." Dawson looked at Flynn. "I've known this man for 15 years. He's many things: stubborn, dangerous when crossed, too quick to take justice into his own hands, but he's not a liar or a kidnapper." Flynn smiled faintly. "High praise coming from you. Don't let it go to your head," Dawson retorted. "You're still in a world of trouble. Murdock knows this town inside and out. If he learns you're here, he'll have men surrounding us within minutes." "What do you suggest?" Flynn asked. Dawson considered. "I have a secure room in the jail where you can stay tonight. Tomorrow, I'll send telegrams to the territorial governor and the federal marshal's office in Denver. We'll need official backup to move against Murdock." "And in the meantime," Penelope asked, "in the meantime, you stay hidden and hope Murdock doesn't get wind of your presence." Dawson rose. "Wait here while I check that the way to the jail is clear." After he left, Flynn took Penelope's hand. "Are you all right? This isn't exactly the warm welcome we'd hoped for." "He believes us," Penelope said. "That's more than I expected, honestly, and he's willing to help." "Dawson's a good man," Flynn agreed. "One of the few truly honest lawmen I've known." Dawson returned shortly. "Coast is clear for now. Follow me and stay close." They slipped out the back door and through a series of alleys, eventually reaching the rear entrance of the jail. Inside, Dawson led them past the regular cells to a heavy door at the back. "This room is reserved for special cases," he explained as he unlocked it. "Witnesses who need protection, mostly. It's not luxurious, but it's secure." The room contained a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and little else. A small barred window high in the wall provided minimal ventilation. "I'll bring food and water," Dawson said. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." After he left, locking the door behind him, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of their situation. "Do you think this will work?" she asked Flynn. "Will the territorial governor really send help?" Flynn sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "If anyone can convince him, it's Dawson. The man has a reputation for integrity that's almost legendary. And if he can't, then we'll find another way," Flynn said with quiet determination. "I meant what I said at the cabin, Penelope. I see a future for us. I intend to make sure we live to experience it." Penelope leaned against him, drawing strength from his presence. "So do I." They slept fitfully that night, both too tense for deep rest. Morning brought Dawson with breakfast and news. "I've sent the telegrams," he reported. "Also put out some quiet inquiries about the girls from the Silver Dollar. One of them, Jenny, I believe you mentioned her, has been located in a settlement about 20 miles from here." "That's wonderful news," Penelope said eagerly. "Jenny was kind to me. I think she would testify if asked." "I'm sending a deputy to bring her in," Dawson confirmed. "Should have her here by tomorrow. In the meantime, I need you both to write out detailed statements about everything that happened." They spent the morning writing their accounts as comprehensive as possible. Penelope found the process both difficult and cathartic. Revisiting her captivity was painful, but committing the truth to paper felt like reclaiming some power over the experience. Around midday, they heard a commotion in the front part of the jail. Dawson, who had been reviewing their statements, rose quickly. "Stay here," he instructed. "Don't make a sound." He left, locking the door behind him. Flynn immediately moved to the small window, straining to hear what was happening. Penelope joined him, her heart racing. "Warrant to search these premises," a voice was saying. "Information suggests you're harboring fugitives, Marshal." "What information would that be?" Dawson's voice replied calmly. "And whose authority does this warrant carry?" "Judge Hollister's." "And my information comes from reliable sources who saw Callahan and the woman entering town last night." Flynn and Penelope exchanged alarmed glances. Judge Hollister was known to be in Murdock's pocket. "Well, you're welcome to search," Dawson said, his tone unconcerned. "Though I think I'd know if I had fugitives in my jail." Heavy footsteps approached, moving through the cell block. Flynn pulled Penelope away from the window, positioning himself between her and the door, his hand on his gun. The footsteps paused outside their room and the door handle rattled. "What's in here, Marshal?" "Storage," Dawson replied smoothly. "Weapons, ammunition, supplies, nothing exciting. Open it." "Can't. Lost the key months ago. Been meaning to get a replacement made." There was a skeptical grunt. "Convenient, we could break it down." "You could," Dawson agreed, "but then you'd be destroying government property without cause. I'd have to report that to the territorial governor. You know how he feels about expenses." A tense silence followed. Penelope held her breath, feeling Flynn's body coiled like a spring beside her, ready to fight if the door came crashing in. Finally, the footsteps moved away. "We'll be watching, Marshal," the voice warned. "Murdock doesn't appreciate being made a fool of." "I'll keep that in mind," Dawson replied. "Good day, gentlemen." Only when the front door of the jail closed did Penelope release her breath. A few minutes later, Dawson returned, his expression grave. "That was too close," he said. "Murdock knows you're in town. Someone must have seen you last night despite our precautions." "What now?" Flynn asked. "If they're watching the jail, we need to move you," Dawson decided. "I have a friend who runs a boarding house on the edge of town. She's discreet and has no love for the Murdocks. You'll be safer there until help arrives from the governor." "When can we move?" Penelope asked. "Tonight after dark. I'll create a distraction to draw away whoever's watching the jail." Dawson paused. "There's something else you should know. I received a response to one of my telegrams." The governor is sending a special investigator, but he won't arrive for 3 days. 3 days, Flynn repeated. Can we stay hidden that long? We'll have to, Dawson said grimly, because there's more. Garrett Murdock has filed formal charges against both of you murder and kidnapping. If he finds you before the investigator arrives, he'll have the legal right to arrest you, and I doubt you'd live to see a trial. The gravity of their situation settled over them like a heavy cloak. Penelope reached for Flynn's hand, finding it already reaching for hers. We've faced worse odds, Flynn said, attempting confidence. At least now we have an ally. More than one, Dawson corrected. My deputies are loyal, and Mrs. Everett, the boarding house owner, has no shortage of shotguns and determination. We'll get you through the next 3 days. That night, Dawson's plan was put into action. He arranged for a minor fire to be set in an empty building across town, drawing attention and manpower away from the jail. Under cover of the ensuing confusion, he smuggled Flynn and Penelope out through a rarely used side door and into a waiting wagon covered with canvas. Stay down and stay quiet, he instructed as his deputy, a young man named Cooper, took the reins. Cooper will get you to Mrs. Everett's. I'll join you when I can. The journey through town was tense, each jolt of the wagon making Penelope fear discovery. Flynn held her close in the darkness beneath the canvas, his presence her only comfort. Finally, the wagon stopped. They heard Cooper exchange a few words with a woman. Then the canvas was pulled back to reveal a stout, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Come quickly, she said, helping Penelope down. Inside before you're seen. Mrs. Everett's boarding house was a large, comfortable home on a quiet street. She led them through the kitchen to a back staircase, explaining in hushed tones that she had prepared a room for them on the 3rd floor. It's used for storage mostly, she said as they climbed. But there's a bed, and no one will think to look for you there. The other boarders believe I've closed the 3rd floor for repairs. The room was indeed filled with trunks and furniture draped in sheets, but she had cleared a space for a bed and a small sitting area. A window looked out over the back garden, and a second door led to what Mrs. Everett explained was a servant's staircase, providing an emergency exit if needed. You'll be safe here, she assured them, lighting a lamp. I'll bring food up 3 times a day. If you need anything, pull this bell cord once. If there's danger, pull it twice and I'll know to hide you. Why are you helping us? Penelope asked. You're putting yourself at risk. Mrs. Everett's face hardened. The Murdocks have brought nothing but misery to this town. My niece worked at one of Garrett's establishments. She disappeared 2 years ago. No one would investigate. She straightened her shoulders. If there's a chance of bringing him to justice, I'll take any risk. After she left, Flynn checked the windows and doors, his bounty hunter's instincts never at rest. This is a good location, he admitted, defensible with escape routes. Do you think we'll need them? Penelope asked. I hope not. Flynn drew her into his arms, but hope isn't a strategy. We stay vigilant until the investigator arrives. The next 2 days passed in tense waiting. They remained in their room, speaking in whispers, starting at every unexpected sound from below. Mrs. Everett brought them news along with their meals. Jenny had arrived and given her statement to Marshal Dawson, confirming Penelope's account. 2 other former saloon girls had also come forward, encouraged by Jenny's example. Dawson thinks he's building a solid case, Mrs. Everett reported. But Murdock is getting desperate. He's doubled the bounty on your heads and has men searching every building in town. On the evening of the 2nd day, Deputy Cooper arrived with a message from Dawson. The investigator has been delayed, he told them grimly. Storm damaged the railroad tracks. He won't be here for at least 2 more days. Can we stay hidden that long? Penelope asked after Cooper had gone. Flynn's expression was troubled. Murdock's net is tightening. Even with Mrs. Everett's help, we can't remain in town indefinitely without being discovered. What are our options? We could try to leave tonight, head back to the mountains. Penelope shook her head. And abandon the case against Murdock, go back to running and hiding. No, we've come too far for that, Flynn smiled faintly. I knew you'd say that. You're right, of course we stay and fight. That night, they made love with a new urgency, both aware that these might be their last moments of peace together. Afterward, as Penelope lay in Flynn's arms, she found herself thinking of the future they had discussed: a small town somewhere far from Wyoming, a schoolhouse where she would teach, a sheriff's office where Flynn would uphold the law without having to kill. "We'll have that life," Flynn murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "I promise you." "I know," Penelope replied, tracing the lines of his face with her fingertips. "I believe in us, Flynn Callahan. Whatever happens tomorrow or the next day, I believe in what we've found together." The dawn of the third day brought rain, a steady, soaking downpour that somehow matched their somber mood. Mrs. Everett reported that the search for them had intensified, with Murdock's men now offering bribes for information. "They came here yesterday," she admitted. "Searched the first and second floors. I told them the third floor was being renovated due to water damage. They seemed to believe me, but they might return." "You've done more than enough for us," Flynn told her. "If they come back, don't risk yourself further." "Nonsense," Mrs. Everett said firmly. "I'll do what's necessary." Around noon, they heard a commotion below, raised voices, heavy footsteps. Mrs. Everett's bell cord jerked twice, the signal for danger. Flynn immediately moved to the window, checking the distance to the ground. "Too far to jump safely," he muttered, then crossed to the servants' staircase. "This is our best option." They grabbed their few possessions and slipped onto the narrow staircase, closing the door quietly behind them. The stairs led down to a small door that opened into the garden behind the house. "We'll make for the stables," Flynn whispered. "If we can get horses." The sound of the door above them being kicked open interrupted his planning. Voices echoed down the stairwell. "Check everywhere. Murdock says they're definitely in this house." Flynn drew his gun. "Go," he urged Penelope. "I'll hold them off." "Not without you," she insisted, drawing her own revolver. They descended as quickly and quietly as possible, but the old stairs creaked betrayingly. A shout from above told them they'd been spotted. There they are, on the back stairs. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the wood around them. Flynn returned fire, pushing Penelope ahead of him. They burst through the garden door into the pouring rain, running for the cover of a small shed nearby. More of Murdock's men appeared from around the front of the house. Flynn and Penelope ducked behind the shed as bullets thudded into the wood. "We're surrounded," Flynn said grimly, checking his ammunition. "Penelope, I'm sorry. I should never have brought you to Cheyenne." "Don't," she said fiercely. "Don't apologize for giving me the happiest days of my life, even in the midst of danger." Flynn's eyes softened for a moment, then hardened again as he peered around the shed. "I count at least 6 of them. We have maybe a dozen bullets between us. What do we do?" Flynn considered their options. "They want us alive if possible to make examples of us. That gives us a slight advantage." He glanced up at the sky, rain pelting his face. "And this weather helps too. Poor visibility, difficult shooting conditions." "Give yourselves up, Callahan," a voice called. "There's nowhere to run." Flynn ignored the call, his eyes scanning their surroundings for any escape route. The boarding house's back garden was enclosed by a high wooden fence, with the stable beyond it. Between their position and the fence stood several large rain barrels and a clothesline. "I have an idea," he said. "When I give the signal, run for that gap in the fence by the rain barrels. I'll cover you." "And then what?" "I'll be right behind you," Flynn promised. "Ready?" Penelope nodded, gathering herself to run. "Now," Flynn shouted, rising to fire rapidly at their pursuers. Penelope sprinted for the fence, rain and mud making her footing treacherous. Gunfire erupted around her, but Flynn's covering fire kept their attackers pinned down. She reached the gap in the fence and squeezed through, turning immediately to look for Flynn. He was running toward her, still firing his revolver when a bullet struck him in the side. Flynn stumbled but kept moving, determination driving him forward despite the wound. "Flynn," Penelope cried, reaching through the fence to help pull him through. He collapsed against her on the other side, his face pale with pain. "Keep going," he gasped. "The stables." Penelope supported him as they staggered toward the small stable behind the boarding house. Inside, 2 horses snorted nervously at the sound of gunfire. Penelope helped Flynn onto one, then mounted the other herself. "Which way?" she asked as shouts indicated their pursuers had discovered the gap in the fence. "The road heading east," Flynn directed, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. It leads to the marshal's office if we can reach Dawson. They burst from the stable into the rain-soaked street, spurring their horses to a gallop. Behind them, Murdock's men scrambled for their own mounts, the pursuit delayed but not abandoned. Flynn swayed dangerously in his saddle as they rode. Penelope kept close beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. The rain had turned the streets to mud, making their progress slower than she would have liked. "Stay with me, Flynn," she urged. "We're almost there." "Always," he replied, his voice weak but determined. "Not leaving you now, schoolteacher." They rounded a corner onto Front Street, the marshal's office visible ahead. To Penelope's immense relief, she saw Dawson himself standing on the boardwalk, apparently alerted by the gunfire. "Marshal," she called, "help us." Dawson sprinted toward them, his deputies emerging from the office behind him. As he reached them, Flynn finally lost his battle with consciousness, sliding from his horse into Dawson's waiting arms. "He's been shot," Penelope explained frantically as she dismounted. "Murdock's men found us at Mrs. Everett's." "Get him inside," Dawson ordered his deputies, "and prepare for a fight. Those bastards won't give up easily." Inside the marshal's office, they laid Flynn on a cot in one of the cells. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow. The bullet had entered his side, leaving an ugly wound that bled profusely. "We need a doctor," Penelope said, pressing a folded cloth against the wound. "Cooper's gone for him," Dawson assured her. "He'll be here soon." Outside, the sound of approaching riders heralded the arrival of Murdock's men. Dawson positioned his deputies at the windows, rifles ready. "This has gone far enough," he muttered. "Time to remind these hooligans what law and order actually means." A voice called from outside. "Marshal Dawson." "Send out Callahan and the woman, and no one else needs to get hurt." Dawson stepped to the door, keeping to one side to avoid presenting a target. "This is a federal marshal's office," he called back. "Anyone who fires on it is committing a federal crime. Go back to your boss and tell him his days of running roughshod over this town are finished. We have a warrant for their arrest," the voice insisted. "Signed by Judge Hollister." "Judge Hollister doesn't have jurisdiction over federal fugitives," Dawson replied. "And as of an hour ago, I've declared them under federal protection as material witnesses in an investigation into the Murdock criminal enterprise." This declaration was met with confused silence. Penelope, still tending to Flynn, looked up at Dawson questioningly. "It's true," he told her quietly. "The telegraph came through just before the rain started. The federal investigation has officially begun. These men have no legal standing to take you or Flynn into custody now." Hope surged within Penelope. "So it's over, we're safe?" "Not quite," Dawson admitted. "Garrett Murdock isn't the type to respect legal niceties when he's cornered. These men might still try to take you by force." As if to confirm his assessment, a volley of shots hit the front of the building. Dawson's deputies returned fire, the exchange brief but intense. "They're retreating," one deputy reported, "heading back toward town." "They'll be back," Dawson predicted grimly, "with more men." The doctor arrived a few minutes later, hurrying to Flynn's side. After a tense examination, he looked up at Penelope. "The bullet needs to come out," he said. "It's lodged near his lung. Dangerous, but I've seen worse." "Will he survive?" Penelope asked, her voice barely audible. The doctor's expression softened at the naked fear in her eyes. "He's strong and he has something to live for. That counts for a lot in these cases." The operation to remove the bullet was agonizing for Penelope to watch. Flynn regained consciousness briefly, his eyes finding hers before the doctor administered laudanum to ease the pain. His hand gripped hers with surprising strength. "Don't leave," he murmured. "Never," she promised. "Rest now, I'll be here when you wake." The bullet extraction was successful, though Flynn lost a concerning amount of blood. The doctor bandaged him thoroughly and provided instructions for his care. "Keep him still," he advised Penelope. "No movement for at least a week. With luck and good nursing, he should recover fully." As night fell, Dawson reinforced the office, positioning his deputies strategically and sending for additional help from nearby settlements. Penelope remained at Flynn's side, bathing his forehead when fever set in, speaking softly to him when he stirred restlessly. "You promised me Oregon," she reminded him during one lucid moment. A little house near your sheriff's office, children playing in a garden. You can't break that promise, Flynn Callahan. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Wouldn't dream of it, he whispered before drifting back to sleep. The expected attack came near midnight, a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Dawson and his deputies were ready, meeting the attackers with disciplined fire. Penelope crouched beside Flynn's cot, her revolver ready, determined that no one would reach him while he was vulnerable. The battle raged for nearly an hour, the marshal's office sustaining considerable damage but holding firm. Finally, the attackers withdrew, leaving 2 of their number dead in the street. They won't try again tonight, Dawson said, checking on Penelope and Flynn. But tomorrow might be another story. What about the federal investigator? Penelope asked. When will he arrive? Should be on tomorrow morning's train, assuming the tracks are clear now. Dawson ran a hand over his tired face. One more day, Miss Andrews, that's all we need to hold out. Flynn's condition stabilized overnight, his fever breaking toward dawn. Penelope, who had refused to leave his side despite Dawson's offers to relieve her, finally allowed herself to doze in a chair beside his cot. She woke to his fingers gently stroking her hair. Good morning, schoolteacher, he said, his voice weak but clear. Flynn, she breathed, taking his hand. How do you feel? Like I've been shot, he replied with a wry smile. But I've had worse. Don't joke, Penelope scolded, tears of relief stinging her eyes. I was so afraid. I know. His eyes held hers. But I made you a promise. Oregon, remember? I intend to keep it. Dawson approached, relief evident on his face at seeing Flynn conscious. Good to have you back among the living, Callahan. We've got news, good or bad, Flynn asked. Both. The federal investigator arrived on the morning train with a contingent of U.S. Marshals. They've already moved to secure Murdock's offices and businesses. And the bad news, Murdock himself has barricaded inside his home with about 20 armed men. He's refusing to surrender, demanding safe passage out of the territory in exchange for not burning the town to the ground. Flynn attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain. He's bluffing. Murdock won't destroy his own investments. Maybe, Dawson conceded. But he's desperate, and desperate men do foolish things. What does the federal investigator plan to do? Penelope asked. He's giving Murdock until noon to surrender peacefully after that. Dawson shrugged. Things will get messy. As noon approached, tension gripped the town. Citizens closed their businesses and remained indoors, sensing the impending confrontation. From the marshal's office, Penelope could see federal marshals positioned around the town square, rifles at the ready. Flynn, despite her protests, had insisted on sitting up in a chair by the window. I need to see this through, he told her. Need to know it's really over. The federal investigator, a stern-faced man named Barrett, had visited briefly, taking their statements and assuring them that the case against Garrett Murdock was substantial. Between your testimonies, the physical evidence, and the statements from the Saloon girls, we have more than enough to put him away for life, Barrett had said, assuming we take him alive. As the town hall clock struck noon, all eyes turned to Murdock's mansion on the hill overlooking the town. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then a white flag appeared at the front door. He's surrendering, Dawson said, disbelief in his voice, but the surrender was a ruse. As federal marshals approached the mansion, gunfire erupted from the windows. The marshals dove for cover, returning fire as they retreated. Damn fool, Dawson muttered. He's chosen to go out fighting. The battle for Murdock's mansion lasted less than an hour. The federal marshals, well-trained and disciplined, methodically suppressed the defending fire and advanced on the building from multiple directions. When they finally breached the doors, resistance collapsed quickly. Murdock himself was captured trying to escape through a hidden tunnel that led from his wine cellar to a stable behind the property. Brought into town in shackles, he was a far cry from the powerful figure who had terrorized the region, disheveled, wild-eyed, raging impotently at his captors. As he was led past the marshal's office to the waiting prison wagon, he caught sight of Flynn and Penelope watching from the window. His face contorted with hatred. "This isn't over, Callahan," he shouted. "You'll never be safe, not you, not your woman." Flynn's arm tightened around Penelope's shoulders. "It is over," he said quietly, though Murdock couldn't hear him. For him, at least. The prison wagon departed for Denver that same day, Murdock and his surviving henchmen locked securely inside, accompanied by a heavy guard of federal marshals. With their departure, a palpable sense of relief swept through Cheyenne. "Hard to believe people lived under his thumb for so long," Dawson remarked as he shared a meal with Flynn and Penelope that evening. "But that's the way of tyrants, they thrive on fear until someone stands against them." "What happens now?" Penelope asked. "To the town, I mean. Rebuilding," Dawson said simply. "Murdock's legitimate businesses will be sold, his properties redistributed. The town council will regain actual authority. It'll take time, but Cheyenne will be better for it. And us?" Flynn asked, still pale but improving hourly. "What happens to us? You're both officially cleared of all charges," Dawson informed them. "Barrett wants you to testify at the trial in Denver, but that won't be for several months. Until then, you're free to go wherever you please." Penelope and Flynn exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them without words. "We were thinking of heading west," Flynn said. "Oregon, maybe. I hear they need lawmen and schoolteachers in the growing settlements there." Dawson smiled knowingly. "Sounds like you two have been making plans." "Life plans," Penelope confirmed, her hand finding Flynn's. "If you'd told me a month ago that being kidnapped and shackled in a saloon basement would lead to the greatest happiness I've ever known, I would have thought you mad." "Life has strange ways of bringing people together," Dawson agreed, "though I wouldn't recommend your particular method to most couples." They laughed, the sound free and unrestrained for the first time in weeks. Flynn's recovery took longer than he would have liked, but Penelope was a patient and devoted nurse. They stayed in Cheyenne through the summer, living in a small house provided by the grateful town council. As Flynn regained his strength, they began making concrete plans for their future. Letters were sent to settlements in Oregon Territory, inquiring about positions. Responses came back enthusiastically. A growing town named Willow Creek offered both a sheriff's position for Flynn and a teaching position for Penelope, with land available to build a home. "It sounds perfect," Penelope said as they read the letters together. "A fresh start, far from the shadows of the past." "There's one thing I want to do first," Flynn said, taking her hand, "before we leave for Oregon." The next day, he asked Marshal Dawson to accompany them to the small church on the edge of town. There, with Dawson and Mrs. Everett as witnesses, Flynn Callahan and Penelope Andrews were married in a simple ceremony. Flynn had procured a proper ring to accompany Catherine's pearl ring, which Penelope now wore on a chain around her neck, honoring both his past and their future together. "I never thought I'd find love again," Flynn said in his vows. "Never thought I deserved it. But you taught me that the heart doesn't know what it deserves, only what it needs. And mine needs you, Penelope Andrews, now and always." Penelope's voice trembled as she responded. "From the moment you cut me free from those chains, you've been liberating me in ways I never imagined possible. You freed me from fear, from loneliness, from a life half-lived. I promise to walk beside you through whatever adventures await us, loving you completely every step of the way." They left for Oregon in early September, traveling with a wagon train for safety. The journey was long but filled with anticipation rather than fear, each mile taking them closer to their new home, their new life together. Willow Creek welcomed them warmly. Flynn assumed his duties as sheriff with a dedication that quickly earned the town's respect. Penelope's schoolhouse soon filled with eager children, the education she provided more comprehensive than anything the settlement had known before. They built a home on the edge of town, a sturdy house with a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings, watching the sunset over the distant mountains. A garden flourished under Penelope's care, and a stable housed Flynn's faithful stallion alongside new additions for them, both to ride on weekend explorations of their adopted homeland. In the spring of their second year in Willow Creek, their first child was born, a daughter they named Catherine, honoring the past while embracing the future. 2 years later, a son followed, named James after Flynn's first child. Sometimes at night, when the children were asleep and they sat together on their porch, Flynn would take Penelope's hand and simply hold it, words unnecessary between them. In those moments, they both reflected on the strange, dangerous path that had brought them together, a captive schoolteacher and a hardened bounty hunter, finding in each other exactly what they needed to heal and become whole. "Do you ever miss it?" Penelope asked one such evening, years later. The freedom of the bounty hunter's life, Flynn smiled, watching their children playing in the yard with the family dog. "Freedom is relative," he said. "I thought I was free then, but I was actually chained to the past, to grief and vengeance." He kissed her hand. "You were the one who truly freed me, Penelope. From the moment I cut those shackles from your ankle, I was liberating myself as well." "Then we saved each other," she concluded, leaning against his shoulder. "Yes," Flynn agreed, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. "And we keep doing so, every day." In the years that followed, their life in Willow Creek flourished. Flynn's reputation for fair but firm justice spread throughout the territory, while Penelope's school became known for producing exceptionally well-educated students. They added to their family another daughter who shared Penelope's love of books, and a final son who had Flynn's quiet determination. They never forgot their beginnings: the saloon basement, the cabin in the mountains, the desperate flight to Cheyenne. These memories served not as shadows over their happiness, but as reminders of what they had overcome together, of the strength they had found in each other when all seemed lost. And sometimes, on the anniversary of the day Flynn had cut her free, Penelope would catch him watching her with a particular intensity, as if still amazed that the frightened woman he'd found chained in a basement had become the cornerstone of his world, the heart of the family they had built together. "What are you thinking?" she would ask, though she already knew, and Flynn would smile, taking her hand as he always did. "That some chains are meant to be broken," he would reply, "and others, like the ones binding us together, are meant to last forever."